This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we are live on the air with Sarah Seltzer. You're a writer, and you're out of New York City. And we're going to talk about your book, The Singer Sisters, and also about the kind of story about like how you can overcome rejection and life's up and downs and write your debut novel. So that's kind of like the focus. But we're going to tell your story. But before we get to that, we always ask every guest on the show a couple of questions before we get to the heart of your story.
All right.
What motivates you and why do you do what you do?
That's a great question. I wish I could say that it's something really noble. But the truth is, for me, I'm just not happy unless I'm doing something creative. And I think a lot of people are this way. It could be, whether it's knitting or adult coloring books or working in your garden or creating an awesome podcast or whatever it is. Most of us are creative. We're encouraged to be creative as kids. And for me, I just get really cranky if I'm not writing. Writing is, it's the easiest way for me to be creative. It's the most inspiring way. I love to read. I love to write. So, publishing is obviously a dream come true and a great goal. But for me, I have to write to, I don't write every single day, but I have to write and have some kind of project that I'm working on to be happy. It's like exercising or drinking water.
That's awesome because you're an editor at Lilith Magazine, and you did some reporting in the New York Times, and you write essays and cultural criticism. So you're like a professional writer. So you're in your space that you want to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that I always talk to creative people. The whole podcast was developed to talk to people who are creative in all areas. So we end up talking to a lot of writers. And what made you want to write a novel? Because you're writing like articles, being an editor. What made you want to write a novel?
I just think that reading novels is so satisfying. I think all of us, our attention spans are a little less, I don't know how to say this, robust than they were probably before cell phones, before COVID, before everything that's happening in the world.
I'm a child in the 70s, so I understand.
Yeah. But growing up, I was just one of those bookworms. I loved reading, anything from like Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys to the books that were on my school's shelves to my, starting to read my parents' books, get books off of their shelves. And I just, I love the sort of satisfying arc of a novel. It's like, I think to me, it's like the difference between, I love watching TV. I love TV shows, but there's something so satisfying about a 2-hour movie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You go on a whole journey, and it's really interesting because my kids are of this generation where they're used to like streaming shows and watching like, 5 or 6 episodes of a show in a row, which we didn't do. And they find movies kind of stressful because of all this. There's a lot like a movie or a novel, a complete like piece of art like that. There's like suspense, there's usually sadness, there's some laughter. There you kind of go through the whole realm of human emotions up and down, and like puts you through your emotional paces. And actually like make my kids watch movies for that reason, because I think it's important for them to like learn how to experience all those
compared
things.
To something that goes like 12 hours or 15 hours.
Exactly.
And it's also the whole art of like I'm a songwriter, and being a child of the 70s, I grew up with vinyl and 8 tracks and actually listening to a complete thought, which means I listened to the whole record.
Yeah. Exactly.
And the books are maybe 200,000 words,
right,
versus 70 or 90 today.
Yeah.
And so the idea that going into Tolkien,
reading
Tolkien, there, going back and reading Moby Dick, and actually wanting to read it, was a different mindset instead of like getting the Cliff Notes and finding some kind of AI description for your book report. You actually had to read it.
Right. It's true. And I think that's, so I always thought, because I loved reading them so much, I'd like to try writing one. So that's
So what made you want to write about a family of folk rock singers?
Yeah, it's funny that you were talking about how much you love vinyl. Some of that comes from discovering my parents' vinyl and the connection I felt to their music. My parents were baby boomers. So like, for instance, like they had like each had a copy of Sgt. Pepper's and like the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, like every kind of like, seminal album from their era. They each had a copy of, and my mom had like the early Beatles albums. They had Stevie Wonder songs in the Key of Life. My dad loved Aretha. So it was like everything. And just to have that treasure trove as a kid, I think, and to hear it, my parents were always playing music, classical, opera, soul, everything.
So it all,
yeah. So I'm not a musician, but I think that the book is sort of in part like about the relationship between like Generation X and millennials, and that music of the 60s and 70s that has had such a huge influence on basically everyone and everything that came after it. Because my book is about the mother and father are 60s folk rock luminaries. Kind of think like maybe Carly Simon and James Taylor, or like Joan Baez and Bob Dylan, kind of in between those two. And the daughter wants to be like a rocker, but she's she knows that her mom had this talent and this influence as a 60s folk singer, that it's going to be hard for her to live up to.
From under it.
Get out from under it. And her mom has secrets, and her mom doesn't want her to go off into the music world without a backup plan. And, and she doesn't really explain why. So the book is really, it's a rock and roll drama. It's about, fame and fortune and falling out of fame and the relationship with the audience, but it's also about a mom and daughter kind of coming to understand each other
revealing, like a parent sometimes not fully revealing their life to their kid, but then kind of telling them just be on a certain path without giving them the reason.
Exactly, which we all can relate to.
It's like they can just do it because I told you. It's like, well, I kind of want to know why.
Exactly.
But that's an interesting dynamic, because as a musician, the Beatles are still kind of like the benchmark in terms of songwriting, and the characters, like that you were inspired to have the Beatle records and vinyl.
Absolutely, yeah. And the relationship between us and our parents' music, and I think it's going to be different. Like going forward, pop music is part of all of our lives, and our kids listen to our music and they have their music, and there's this conversation. But I think for the baby boomers, like that was the first time that pop music was such a huge part of identity and culture. All these documentaries came out. Exactly. Like about the music festival that was here in Harlem at Marcus Garvey Park, Summer of Soul. There was the documentary about the Velvet Underground, who were down in New York City in the 60s. Every kind of music that we listen to today kind of originated in that decade. So it was always really interesting to me. So I think that, subconsciously I gravitated towards it when it was time to write my first book.
Well, there's a lot of, being a child of the 70s, I'm a real purveyor of, like, the Velvet Underground is like iconic for me. Dylan is iconic for me.
Totally.
Like they're listening to the Basement tapes, like all 10 hours of it.
Yeah.
And Big Thing is a big thing for a lot of like purist kind of musicians who like believe in the singer-songwriter. And the idea that you can actually tell a story with music. And that's why I think there's a synergy between like you get a guy like a Bob Dylan or Neil Young or Joni Mitchell.
Exactly.
Like, that you get drawn into that album like you're reading a novel. That's the way I feel when I get a really good record. And so then if you have the synergy of telling a story of a family or like folk rock singers, that's kind of woven into it, that like you've got that interconnectedness of the art and the music all in real time.
Yeah, exactly. I think for me, like I would say that, in some ways, like Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan, they're like literary influences on me. I don't, write like them, but the fact that they could tell these stories that captivated me so much, really, really made a huge impression on me when I was, younger. And just as much as the novels I was reading, those lyrics are really important. And the book is full of lyrics. I mean, they are not as good as Bob Dylan or Joni Mitchell lyrics by any means, but it was really fun to write them and to have them be, they're a key part of the story. So, the characters write things in their songs that maybe they don't feel comfortable saying out loud to each other.
Yeah, that's the thing, is the artists sometimes will speak through their music
Exactly.
to their partner, to the world,
Yeah.
something that they can't say directly. And then it comes through the art, and you were like, "Wow!" It's like that's so powerful. Like, but then you find out like they really can't tell somebody in person that, but through the song they can. So that dynamic is interesting that you're talking about
Yeah.
because I think the secret sauce of any creative person is the fact that they have that vulnerability
Mhm.
and it
Mhm.
comes through the art. But
Mhm.
then the consequences, like maybe in your story, you talk about the dichotomy of like maybe you can say it in the song, but you actually don't live that way.
Right. That's right. Exactly.
So that becomes a
Exactly.
struggle. Does that become part of the whole fabric?
Yeah, it is part of it, that there you can write these really pure things in your music that maybe you can't live up to. For sure. And your pain in life, right? When you turn your pain into art, it can become really beautiful. But in your daily life, if you're experiencing pain or heartbreak, it's just a pain. It's just hard. It's not,
It's hard.
you could make some sort of beautiful art about it. But then when you're dealing with like your kids, as my character is, maybe you're just yelling at them. So that tension that they feel between their mother, who was able to create such beautiful art and is also just a flawed human being, to
Yeah.
them, she's just their mom. To the rest of the world, she's this iconic songwriter, is a really interesting thing that I explore as well.
Yeah, because you're living up to can you live up to the icon status?
Exactly.
And especially with your family, probably you don't,
Right.
because they know the
Right.
truth of like, hey, you know, my parents are just like any other parent, or maybe they're like lacking
Yeah.
what my friends' parents are there, but they're on the road,
Yeah.
or they're in the studio, or
Exactly.
they're on tour, like they're so involved in their head that they're not present.
Right.
And
Right.
so then it's like all this beauty is like, well, I didn't feel that beauty. The
Hmm.
world felt
Hmm.
the beauty, but I didn't feel it.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So is there like a resentment with the kids, like about that?
Yeah, there's some of that. There's resentment. There's resentment that I think that, honestly, my character Emma resents her mom's talent, and that her mom chose to step away from music. And she just doesn't understand how somebody so talented would
Or
make a
walk away
different
from
choice. So that's really baffling to her. She is a lacking mom in some ways. She's good in other ways. Like, as you would kind of imagine, she's like a cool mom. But she also is um is distracted and has her own kind of secret world that her kids aren't part of, and they feel shut out. Particularly her daughter feels shut out from it, and she
it.
can't quite understand why. And part of her growing up throughout the novel is kind of coming to understand like what her mom has been through as a woman in music in the 60s, and maybe why her mom acts the way she does, even if it's
Oh,
still flawed, that she has her reasons. So
yeah, because maybe she had a toxic experience and got
exactly.
kind of burned out, or
Right.
it's like this is not for me anymore. Because sometimes
Yeah.
you hit that wall, and it's like you're not
Yeah.
enamored by it anymore.
Yeah. And everyone in
Well,
the family is like a different kind of artist, like, which I think would be really interesting to you because you talk to different kinds of artists on your show. Some of them are more performers and really like being in front of a crowd. Some of them are more like behind the scenes people who like to write and create, maybe like in their rooms. And so there's some tension within the family because it's a whole family of artists. They're all creative and they all like to express themselves, but they do it in different ways. And that actually causes tension between them.
Yeah, because there might be like people who think there's like one way, but
Yeah.
there's not one way. But there's
Right.
might be this expectation like, oh, well, you're supposed to be on tour, or you're supposed to
Yeah.
do
You're
this, you're supposed to do that.
exactly
And if you have a different point of view, it's kind of like, Jim Morrison in the Doors.
right.
At the end of the Doors, Jim was kind of like checking out, like, I don't want to be the pop star. I want to be
Yeah.
a writer. I want to be a
Yeah.
poet.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
so then people are like, well, you've got this great thing with the Doors. It's like, well,
Right.
I'm not there because I
Right.
want to be the poet.
Right.
That's what from the beginning he was the poet, and he
Right.
just happened to fall into it and
Exactly.
it worked. But
Yes.
then that's not where his heart was.
Right. That's exactly like my character, actually. And then there's also the Beatles deciding that they didn't want to tour, so they could just be in the studio and
Yeah,
experiment.
right.
I mean,
Yeah,
there's
it's
there's
great.
tons of examples of artists coming to these crossroads. I think as even after I wrote the book, I keep reading, because I continue to love to read about pop culture. I continue to read about rock stars and learn things that like sound very similar to what I wrote about. Like Patti Smith took 18 years off for making music to raise her kids. Like, you know, there's just like these interesting stories
Stories of people
where people come in and out. Exactly.
Yeah, it is people feel like I read about Pete Townsend, like in the Who, and they were kind of like the first punks,
Yeah.
you know, and it's kind of they were, but they at the same time they were punk, they did these progressive rock operas. So you're like, what's the dichotomy with that? Here's this band that's very punk, very much like a pre-Clash band, a pre-Sex Pistols. They're really outrageous. The early version of the Who is like, and even when you saw them, like they had this punk aesthetic, but then they had this progressive bent that seemed to be totally diametrically opposed to what they were doing with Tommy.
Right.
So what is that?
Yeah.
It's like
We contain multitudes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's always the interesting thing, the inner conflict with these stories in music and pop culture.
Yeah, right. Just being, and you know, with like Dylan sort of changing his deal every decade or so, like, you know,
reinventing himself.
Reinventing themselves. And you know, like the Stones making a disco album. I mean, I think you're a singer-songwriter, but you're, you know, a lot of great artists are pushing themselves, or they get burned out and they want to try something different. And so you know, some of the book is also it's about the family making peace with each other, but also about each sort of artist within the family trying to figure out like where they belong as an artist,
where their own path is, like how do they self-actualize, and be happy, because like your management might want you to be happy by putting you on tour, so much that you're not even living, you're kind of just out there, and then like you might have these ideas, like Bowie like to reinvent himself, and he was able to get away with it because he had the force of will that's like, I'm not being moved by whatever they want me to do. I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that's a hard place to be.
Yeah. You have to be really strong.
Don't actually are able to carry that out.
No, you have to be quite strong, I think, to be able to really see your vision through that way. It's fascinating.
So when you're writing the lyrics, like as a writer, it's like, I got to imagine being a folk, like you're building your character like a fantasy novel. They go create their characters, you get these big fantasy worlds that people build up. But now you have to build this world and have authentic voice as a folk rock singer. So like, I guess you're pulling from what you love because you love that genre anyway. So then you, as a writer, it's like, well, I know how I can weave this, because as a musician, like I don't copy Lead Belly. Right. Note for note. But if I get in that mode, I'm going to be in that zone. Yeah. Right. Exactly. So it's not like plagiarism, but I can kind of feel what Lead Belly was doing. Exactly. And go that way. Yeah, exactly. So for each each set of lyrics that I wrote in the novel, and there are quite a few, I kind of had a mood and a couple of singers in mind, maybe a couple of songs. So it was like, oh, this is going to be like, this song is going to be like a road trip song. And I have like, a Joni Mitchell song maybe, and a Bob Dylan song in mind as I'm writing it, but it's its own thing. So that was kind of how I approached it. And for me, the lyrics were fun because like lyrics, at least, pop lyrics don't have to be brilliant. They just have to sound catchy. So it was a different muscle to work than, say, like trying to write a really good poem. You can rhyme like I and by and and my. Because it has to work as a harmony, as a song, as a melody. Exactly.
But I think also like really trying to, at least in some of the lyrics, like hit some emotional beats, so that my readers would try to experience what the characters were experiencing as they were writing and listening to the songs.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. Like when you see Dylan go into like Tangled Up in Blue, or like songs like Idiot Wind.
Yeah, which I've been listening to a lot.
That's on Blood on the Tracks.
Yeah.
It's like, even though it's about his marriage, if you listen to those songs, he creates characters within the song that are like
a man named Greg.
Separate from him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's supposed to be about his divorce.
Right.
He's still making these characters.
Yeah. And it's like the emotions are coming from him, but the stories, he's like a magpie. He's grabbing little stories from everywhere all around him, which is cool.
Yeah, so that's just
Yeah,
a cool way of,
it's
like,
so cool.
approaching, and
Yeah,
then you get the other end, like, if you deal with, like, a Joni Mitchell or Neil Young, and they
yeah,
get to these really, like like, vulnerable lyrics.
yeah, exactly.
They pull, like, when you get Neil is, like, a lot of times I love his stuff where he's, like, he's got that kinda shaky pitch. They even called him
Mhm,
shaky sometimes because
mhm.
he had this thing where he would, like, have this pitch is, like, wavering.
Yeah,
And he would do it like that on Tonight's the Night, and he's talking
yeah,
about the death of one of his roadies,
yeah,
and it's just so poignant, and he's not trying to be perfect. He's like, "I'm not." He actually said, "I was going into the ditch." He had this thing called the Ditch Trilogy.
yeah,
He had done, like, all these perfect pitch type records, and then he said, "Well, I'm not gonna go that way. I'm gonna go for the vulnerability of my voice
yeah,
and
yeah.
tell the story in that way," so it's, like, very present. So in terms of, like, their approach to your characters, how do
Mhm.
they like, approach their voices? Are you able to kinda describe that with your
A little
text?
bit, yeah. So, the two sisters, I kind of had fun with the two sisters in the band together, the singer sisters. So the folk band in the '60s is my main character, one of my two main characters, Judy, and she's also with her sister Sylvia, who's a character in the novel too. And Sylvia has like the pure voice. Sylvia is like the one who sort of sounds like everyone says she sounds like Joan Baez or Judy Collins or one of these,
Oh, okay.
and like Judy is the really talented songwriter, but she has the rougher voice. And so at the beginning of the novel, when they're teenagers, everyone thinks of Sylvia as the talent because she's more beautiful, she's taller, she's more confident, and she has the more beautiful, like classically beautiful voice. But Judy is like the secret weapon.
Yeah,
And by the end, everyone recognizes that she's a really good songwriter and that her voice, even though her voice is rougher and she's singing harmony, she actually has something to offer too from with her voice. So that there's a little bit of that. And then Emma, the daughter, is more of like a riot girl screaming,
right, like punk rockers, yeah,
rougher voice. Yeah.
or
Yeah, I tried.
girly sound type of thing, like,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
like
like Liz Phair type of, like,
exactly. Liz Phair is exactly one of my, inspirations for her. So they, I did try to kind of make each of them like a little bit of a composite of like different they're their own characters, and then they're also like, maybe 5 or 6 for each character,
yeah,
real singers who they're supposed to kind of be like or similar to. And so that was also really fun because like for Emma, the rocker, like there's Liz Phair, like she has qualities of someone like an Alanis who was like really, really
of course,
famous and
yeah,
a
yeah,
huge pop star, but also someone like, Ani DeFranco, who was always like an indie author,
yeah, super indie,
super
yeah,
indie and, going around just with her guitar. So I kind of was like able to bring in some things from both of them, which I thought,
like a
which was
Juliana
cool.
Hatfield kind of Blake Baby.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
So
get it.
there's yeah, it's fun. Yeah, so it's fun. And I think, what was really fun about the book and what's been fun about, it's been out for about 6 months now, is that some readers who like you clearly are, super, super up on their pop culture, like get all the references and they're like, oh, like Emma is like these musicians. And, and some people maybe only understand the music from the '60s or only understand from the '90s, but they just, are enjoying the vibe. And some people are just in it for the family drama
But
and they
if
don't
family
care about
drama
the
is
music
like,
at
yeah,
all.
because if you're a
Uh,
good writer, you can pull somebody into
yeah,
something
yeah,
just because of the narrative and
yeah,
the dialogue, and if people get hooked,
yeah,
it's like, they get hooked on that song, they get pulled into the song, you get hooked by the intrigue,
yeah,
right? The
yeah,
drama,
exactly,
right? Like,
exactly.
if you
Yeah,
then people like, "Oh, I like this kind of," maybe not that it's a soap opera, but they like the idea you get pulled into the kind of, story between the people, like,
yeah,
just a dialogue that between, different souls and
yeah,
how they respond to life.
exactly,
People can see things that like, oh, that mirrors things I have experienced, and people, every time somebody hears a song, the fan kind of
exactly.
owns it, right?
Right.
They get the vision. The songwriter wrote this, but the fans got that. Do you address that kind of thing in
Yes,
your book?
definitely. Definitely. I think so much for Judy in particular, who's the '60s iconic songwriter. She's writing these songs that are really from her own experience. They're kind of diaristic. They are Joni Mitchell like in that way, but people are interpreting them. She has these fans coming up to her and being like, you wrote about me, like you wrote about my life. And she's always just like, I was just trying to write a nice song. So that's definitely a conflict that she experiences, that, you know, people kind of see her as a prophet, and that is what, you know, Dylan has so obviously struggled with his whole career.
Yeah, he
The
always has.
expectations that people have of him and of his lyrics, and so I wanted that to be
Another thing, it's
part of
hard.
her
It
story
becomes a
too.
big weight on your
It
shoulders,
is a big weight,
and
and
then
that's one of the
sometimes,
reasons.
like, people
Yeah,
get disappointed.
yeah, exactly.
Like people get disappointed in Dylan when he doesn't represent, like, the ideology the way they think he should,
Exactly,
especially with his
exactly.
like, people asking about his protest music,
Right.
and
Yeah.
then he kinda like Scorsese interviewed him, and he's, like, kinda walking away from it, saying, "Well, you know, I
Yeah.
said that was just a song
Yeah.
that I wrote. It's like, I wasn't part of the movement, I'm a writer,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I just interpret, and that's not exactly where I am." It's like, okay,
Yeah.
people that weren't buying it because
Yeah,
they
because
were
he was so
catching
good
Dylan.
at it.
'Cause
Yeah.
they're like, "Well, you must believe in that because you
Yeah.
wrote it."
And I think he did, you know, I think he really did, because the songs are so authentic, but I also think that he was just, yeah, he was also kind of a documentarian who was writing about everything he saw. So he was able to he has that quality of being able to kind of inhabit different
Spaces, yeah.
spaces, and, you know, it's true, like the protest songs he wrote in those 2 or 3 years were extraordinary, and my characters actually talk about it in the book. Like in the opening scene, they're talking about Blowing in the Wind.
Yeah.
And talking about, you know, how, like, what an amazing song it is, and how hard it is to write their own songs after something like that.
Just like that comes along, how do
Yeah,
you match that? But it's like,
exactly,
the thing is, like, you gotta find something that's, like, inside of you,
exactly.
where I think the comparison
Yeah,
trap is where you get stuck. Like, if you're trying to write that, or Dylan wrote it,
yeah.
you need to find
Right,
something, like, that's inside of you, right?
exactly.
Something you've experienced that's uniquely something, but then you can put a shine on it, and then it becomes that's your voice, and then you
Exactly.
can take it and put it out there, and that's how you get these indie, people like the Liz Phair and the Juliana
Mhm.
Hatfields, because they're able to get out there as a singer-songwriter and
Right,
have their voice, and they're not Joni Mitchell,
right,
and
right, but they're so
they're not
authentically themselves.
they're themselves, they're
Mhm.
like who they are, but they're like
Yeah.
they might have been inspired by Joni to get on stage and do it,
Mhm.
but they're not her.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all true.
That's
Yeah.
cool, but the
Yeah.
whole dynamic of your book is super interesting to me because, growing up in that era
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
song is so important.
So important.
And the writer, not that like the guys on Tin Pan Alley are writing it, like you wrote it.
Mhm.
Like the difference is like the idea, like you had this whole machine of like songwriters that would sing like Sinatra and
Right.
give it to
Yeah.
all these great singers,
Right.
but like nobody thought that maybe they should write it. It's like, no,
Yeah.
that's somebody else should write it. The idea that you could have the permission to write, is that kind of coming from the fact that their family was famous, or that they felt like, that gave them permission structure to be a writer?
I think that that's what that's why I decided to put it in the folk genre, because we're talking about, I like lots of different kinds of music, but I think what was so interesting about the folk revival, and it's kind of addressed in the new Dylan movie, like
Mhm.
this Greenwich Village folk revival of the early 60s, was like, that was what made it so revolutionary, was that, like, you could have a guitar and write your own songs, or, thanks to Dylan, write your own
Yeah.
songs, and just, like, you didn't have to be a musical prodigy, you didn't have to be super well trained, all you needed was a guitar, and you could borrow someone's guitar, and then suddenly you could do it yourself. And that was the big change from like the Tin Pan Alley era.
Yeah. Yeah.
That, so, like, it's just it's a very appealing, the idea that you could just kind of pack your guitar up and go and start playing at these hootenannies and these clubs, and, it was a very brief period, but it was so fruitful, and it's obviously still so big in all of our imaginations.
Yeah, I mean, still in the indie world, I
Yeah.
find indie musicians all over the world that I tend to interview, not as much as I used to, but every month I get 2 or 3 independent acts.
Uh-huh.
Doesn't matter where they are. And if I find them interesting, I bring them to the world,
Yeah.
and because I've always liked that,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
as a fan of music.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
to find the people who are doing something that's maybe not hasn't hit the world yet. It's like the indie emerging artist,
Right.
the person who's willing to kind of get out there and be the Velvet Underground of their
Yeah,
generation.
right.
You
Totally.
know? Yeah, that's what I'm always looking for that because that to me is like that's exciting to hear something that's not so on repeat. Everybody
Mhm.
likes to just take the cloned thing
Mhm. Yeah.
and the thing that's kind of expected of you instead of like trying to actually, be willing to have your own voice out there.
Yeah. 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 And when people hear an original voice, they get so excited about it. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's just a
Yeah.
kind of in an
How
era where people think you can just AI everything.
I know, and yeah, I know. I think it's so interesting that the Dylan movie is so big at this moment because of that. Because it's really making a case for like authenticity and having your own voice. But in its portrayal, not just of Dylan, but also of like the other musicians who are in the
Yeah,
movie,
Pete Seeger, like
Seeger and Baez, and like the folkies and bluesies
John
who comes
Cash.
through. Yeah,
Johnny
like
Cash.
yeah, and they're
I
and
love
they're
Johnny Cash.
they're each so unique and so true to themselves. And it's not a big production for any of them. It's just, like their voices. And so it's very appealing right
Yeah, just
now, I
have
think.
that Americana thing.
Yeah.
The idea when Dylan got with the band and they created this Americana vibe at Big Pink. And these songs is like this stuff could have been written like in the 30s, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of folky, hillbilly
It sounds
Americana, that
yeah.
weirdness, and then but it
Yeah.
wasn't just that.
Right.
There's
Because there's
swirling
poetry and
organs and
lyricism. Yeah.
poetry and
Yeah.
saying all these, but it's coming from this it's not
Yeah.
country, but it kinda coming from country, and it's
Yeah.
got rock in it.
A little
Robbie's
folk, a
throwing
little
these licks in
country.
there,
Yeah.
and you're like, What's going on?"
Yeah.
And it's just to me, is like that has always been the process of those basement tapes.
Mm-hmm.
Think of the process that a songwriter goes through to do their work,
Mm-hmm.
and the idea that like Dylan on his typewriter. He's kind of famous for just going on his typewriter, just kind of stream of consciousness, getting it out and just coming. He's like channeling something from the muse, and he's able to just put all this material out. And you're like, what? How did he able to? Did you go into like how do your characters create their work? I mean, did it come from like angst or hard work or like how do they develop their songs?
I think it's different for all of them. I think that for Judy, the one who's sort of the most talented songwriter of the group, it's she is really naturally gifted in the way that like Joni Mitchell or Dylan is, and she's also just really really smart, and she also has like huge in the world of parenting. We'd say she has very big feelings, and she feels really restricted by society. So she has a lot of anger, and sadness about kind of how everyone expects her to conform and be a certain way. So a lot of her songwriting, her kind of most famous songs, come from that. And then everyone else around her is writing songs differently. Her husband is more of like a poppy like melody guy, and for him I think it's more hard work, and he's like just more of like a natural showbiz guy. She's more of a poet and he's like a performer. And then her daughter is more imitative. I think she hasn't, maybe like she's still in the process of finding her voice, but she does. Her kind of most famous song in the book comes from like a letter. She turns a letter that a stalker fan of her mom's leaves. She turns that into a big song. The way that was sort of borrowed from Sarah McLachlan had this big song in the 90s that was, I think, like a stalker, like she turned a stalker's letter.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So and this is a little different because it wasn't like menacing, but it was but yeah, because she doesn't have material yet because she's kind of more spoiled. Like her parents were successful musicians, and she's goes to an art school and she kind of is free to do whatever she wants. So like her mom was such a was so angry because in the 60s it was really really still very strict for young women, and there's a lot of shame and stuff. And for Emma, like her parents let her do whatever. She's roaming around New York City with her friends. She has piercings, she has tattoos, it's harder for her to find her voice. Yeah. She's more of a free spirit. So I think that is another tension that sort of animates the book, is that her mother has a much harder life, but that also like leads to more productive songwriting. And so, you know, Emma
Because
is kind
if
of a
you
rebel
don't go
without a
through the
cause.
struggle, then that's
Yeah.
always the rub.
Which isn't
Like
how it is for everyone. I mean, like Taylor Swift, I think, you know, can
you
write,
can
like is a
write.
pretty privileged person, and she, you know, can turn her everyday breakups and like friendship
You
dramas
just
into these
turn on.
incredible songs. So, you know,
Well, I
she
think
has
it's
the
that
talent.
writer's ability
Yeah,
to process.
exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
you could be in a really good place financially and
Yeah.
still be
Yeah.
able to kind of process
And heartbreak is
things.
universal, you
Yeah,
know?
with just leaves coming through you, like you
Yeah.
still more money, more problems. So you can
Yeah.
still find the
Right.
pain in it, right?
Yeah.
Like Neil Young, he
Yeah.
always found,
Yeah.
and he was like, and he would kind of talk about it, like I'm making all this money, but there's people around me dying, right?
Yeah.
So, and so
Right.
I'm gonna look at not just
Yeah.
myself. I'm gonna look at everything else
Right.
and find, it's just how you weave the story.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's the talent of a creative. Is like you can take the everyday thing you see. You could go to a cafe and see something, and
Mhm.
then put that into a song. You can walk
Yeah.
down the street and see something. You look up and see. You just able to look at things, and then also find something in yourself, like a feeling, and then
Mhm.
weave that together with the external, and then
Exactly.
suddenly it's magical. Like,
Right.
and some people maybe can't process. Like, wow, how can you do that?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like that's what the creative
And
soul
it's
can do.
not that different from writing fiction, you know, or other kinds of creativity where I think you're always mixing like your internal state and your emotions with things that you observe or feel externally. So, you know, in the same way, like this book, I'm not a musician. I've never been famous, but some of
Yeah,
the questions about making art versus being a parent versus, you know, like what are your duties to your creativity versus to the people you love,
the
that, you know,
responsibilities. Yeah,
that's coming from me. And the close, you know, my family and I are super close. We don't have the kind of rivalries that that the family does, but you know, just the like family dynamic, the close family, the constant back and forth, that comes from my family too. So I think most of it is coming from pop culture, but you have to have something of yourself
yeah.
in
You weave in like
your art. Yeah, that
your
makes it
own.
feel authentic. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're able to take those pieces that you're willing to share,
Yeah.
the vulnerability of opening up,
Hmm.
and then weaving it, and then like Dylan, he put layers. He would create character
Layers and layers.
layers, and like and then
Yeah.
like all kinds of synonyms and these all these things is like allegory and it's like, but it's really under the covers. It's him. You dive down,
Totally.
but it's still
He's
able
the
to take
guy. Yeah.
all the layers and you
Yeah.
kind of uncover like, well, how much of this is like where you get down to the real raw
I
emotion.
know. And when you hear like a really personal Dylan song, it's always so it's almost shocking, you know, because right, so many of his songs are so layered, and then occasionally he'll hit you with
Something like
with a
seems
song
really
that's
true.
just like very, very straightforward and emotional, and you're like, wow, he can do that too. Like it's just he can do it all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just cool when you can
Yeah,
have that
yeah,
emotional
yeah,
connection to your audience and
yeah,
not be scared of it. Cause
yeah.
like, cause I think that's the thing is the fear and safety as a human.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
when you get to be an artist, you tend to be a little tread into places that can be a little unsafe in terms of like maybe you could feel because you're revealing a lot. And if
yeah,
somebody hates it, then you take
yeah,
it as a hit, as a
yeah,
personal attack because like that is me
yeah,
that you're attacking. But then you have little bit of a suit of armor when you're, say, well, it doesn't matter, but down deep, it might matter if somebody kills your song and you were putting all your heart into it. You
yeah.
might say it doesn't matter, but it does.
Hmm. Hmm. For sure. Yeah,
Like the critical reviews, like, did you go
exactly.
through anything with like the critics, like slamming any of your artists or
Yes.
having like
Hmm. Hmm.
issues, like, and then
Yeah.
they're kind of like, well,
Yeah.
how do they handle it?
Yeah, yeah, there's a whole scene where there's like a sexist Village Voice critic who really goes off after Judy, and she pretends that she doesn't care, but you know, like then I have her like his voice is in her head for like the next few chapters because
Mhm.
she
Yeah,
says she
get it
doesn't
out.
care, but she can't get it. Yeah, so it's definitely a part of the book, that whole process. And it's funny because then I'm going through the process, or I've been through the process of seeing people review my book, and I've I'm pretty tough, thick skin because I've written for the internet for over a decade, and so
Yeah, you have to be on
Twitter's and
that.
tweeters, and but it's still different when it's your creative work. And it's so far it's been fine, but I can relate to my characters now more.
Yeah,
Having
yeah.
gone through that.
Have you thought of this being turned into a screenplay or a teleplay? Do you think anybody? Because it seems like it could fit that in that world.
Yeah,
from what we've been talking about.
People are people keep bringing that up. I mean, I have a film agent, and we'll just have to see, what happens with the book. I do think it would be a great miniseries.
Yeah, I definitely see it in the way
Yeah.
I could see it being out there in the world and in the streaming world as like a drama, like a teledrama.
Yeah,
Or it
exactly.
could actually be a separate film as an independent film.
Yeah.
If you had an indie film director take it and turn it into a short form, into a 2-hour, 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
It seems like you could go either way.
Yeah.
It just depends. I know that they mentioned that people like to be, just sitting and watching like 10 hours of a single series all at once, like binge watching. So given that, is like you get the whole thing in a weekend.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then maybe you got 10 hours to do it versus 2 hours. So then you can go into things at a really great level of detail.
Yeah.
That you probably can't in 2 hours. Like a film director has to make choices, but sometimes those choices is what makes the movie.
Yeah. You can have fun with a miniseries. I think for any novel, you can have fun with like the minor characters and the subplots, and developing those more.
Stretch it out.
Cool. That'd be fun. Yeah.
Dive into it.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. I mean, the opportunities in the world as a creator, like once you put something out there, they can spawn all these other things. You can do audiobook, you can do the teleplay, screenplay, movie, you can do a theater play for it. There's like it just opens up like a lot of possibilities.
Yeah.
Are you working on like a second book?
And by the way, there is a great audiobook for this. They hired 3 wonderful actresses to do it. So so that was really cool also, because hearing it in other people's voices. Yes, I'm working on another book. I very at the very beginning stages. This book took 7 years, The Singer Sisters, between starting to draft it and it getting published. So I'm not rushing myself for book number 2. I have, a day job and little kids. But I'm trying, because of what we were saying at the very beginning before my internet cut out, that I just have to, I have to be working on something, and it just, I feel better.
Yeah, the drive as an artist, like you do it because you love it, and then it's like the law of attraction, or you kind of throw things out in the world, and you get your tribe comes to it, right? Because that's what. I've always been a big believer as a songwriter. Is like sometimes I'll just throw something into SoundCloud.
Yeah, and see what happens.
Just to see what happens, and then sometimes you get to work with somebody. Somebody finds some, so you would have never, if you just kept it to yourself, then you would lose the opportunity to actually somebody from Norway likes it, and then you start working with them.
Right.
And you end up having a relationship with somebody you would have never had because you were too scared to put it out in the world.
Right.
You're right. The opportunity to get it out there allows you to connect.
Yeah, connecting is, and that's, I think, it's something that I cover in the book, and then something that I've thought about just as a creative person, and the last 6 months touring the book, and realizing that so much of creativity isn't just about finding like a big audience and fame. It's about those connections, like people. It's an opportunity for connection, for human connection, and every single person who reads the book and has a meaningful experience, or that comes to one of my readings and talks to me about, their grandpa was a singer, and and they relate to it for that reason. It's an incredible thing. And it
gets people talking. It gets people vibing, and then tells people like why they love music, or maybe they want to pick up the guitar again.
Exactly.
Or maybe they want to go talk to somebody, or maybe they want to be a writer because they saw what you did, and they say, hey, I could have that voice too.
Yeah.
So it gives people the permission structure to kind of to believe. And to participate, in life, because then you put it out there, and people find the synergy. They find the things that they resonate with them, You know, you hit that kind of Pete Townsend talking about this universal note, right? This key that
Hmm.
like and
Yeah.
who's next that everybody was gonna pick
Yeah.
up on and get to. And I find it's like in art that's happens. You
It
know,
does.
that idea he had that's out there.
It is. Totally. It really is. It is.
So that's that's so we've got your link.
Yeah.
It's kind of like long with the
Long.
number, but that will be
Yeah.
fully clickable. It's the Singer Sisters link you can
Yeah.
see at the end. It says Singer Sisters, but
Yeah.
that will be
You
fully
can also
clickable.
just Google the Singer Sisters.
So that will bring you
Yeah.
right to that. To
Yeah.
is that your publisher
Exactly. But yeah,
site?
yeah, it is my publisher's site for the book. And the book looks
Yes.
like this. It has a lady guitar in front.
Oh,
It's
that's
super
awesome.
cool. Yeah, I love it. It looks like an old concert poster.
Yeah, it does have
So
that vibe from the
yeah.
like a 70s vibe.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yep. So it's fun and it's it's a nice it's a good cover, for merch.
Oh, merch is good. It's
Yeah.
like you never know. You like you go to a book site and sometimes you want to have a poster
Yeah,
and a t-shirt and the buttons. Like, that's how we in the music industry, we can make more money from our shirts
exactly.
than we do from our
Yeah.
than for the album.
This is
But
true.
but that's how it works.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just cool to talk to you today. I'm sorry for that interruption we had,
I'm
but
sorry too.
but at least we were able to finish the interview. I
Yeah.
think that's really important, and people got to hear about like your voice through this book. And I think this book is, being a fan of music, I'm excited to tell my friends about it. I have a lot of friends, in my age group that are always kind of lamenting that this isn't the age of the singer songwriter, right?
Well, this
And
this
so
is the book for you.
yeah, it's like I've been telling my best friend tonight. He's an attorney, but he's like he's always looking for something cool to read, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna get him to
Yeah.
check you out." So yeah, I
Great.
think
Thank you
that's
so much. Yeah. It was really fun talking to you. And we had such a great point of connection with all our shared love of 70s singer songwriters. So it was a delight.
well, thank you, and have a great night.
Okay. Take care.